Imagine this, it's June 1943. A 23-year-old German tanker named Heinrich Schultz, exhausted and defeated after months of desert warfare in Tunisia, steps off a dusty Liberty ship onto American soil, his mind filled with every horror story Nazi propaganda had drilled into him: starvation, beatings, endless interrogations in cold, dark cells. He braces himself for revenge from the decadent Americans whose sons his unit had fought. Instead, the first thing he experiences is a guard handing him a cold drink of fresh water, followed by a hot meal of roast beef, mashed potatoes, and apple pie, more food in one sitting than he'd seen in weeks. As the truck rumbles toward Camp Blanding in the heart of Florida, palm trees whipping past, Heinrich stares in disbelief. This isn't captivity as he imagined it. This is something strangely humane. What if the greatest shock of World War II wasn't the battles, but the unexpected mercy shown to enemies in the American South? A place where former foes picked oranges together under the sun, shared cigarettes during breaks, and even splashed in crystal-clear lakes side by side with their guards. This is the real, forgotten story of Heinrich Schultz, a tale of dignity preserved amid global destruction, where simple swim in Florida waters became a symbol that even in war, humanity could refuse to disappear. Stick around, because what happened next will change how you see the war forever. Heinrich Schultz grew up in the smoky industrial city of Essen, Germany, where factory whistles and the weight of economic hardship defined daily life. Like millions of young men, he answered the call in 1940, joining the Wehrmacht with a mix of duty and youthful idealism. Assigned to the 15th Panzer Division of the legendary Afrika Korps, he quickly learned the harsh realities of desert combat: scorching days, freezing nights, constant sand in every crevice, and the ever-present threat of British artillery or American dive bombers after the Allies landed in North Africa. By spring 1943, the once invincible Rommel's forces were trapped in a shrinking Tunisian pocket. Supplies dwindled to nothing, ammunition gone, fuel tanks dry, men surviving on sips of brackish water and the occasional captured ration. On May 8, 1943, near Bizerte, Heinrich's tank crew surrendered. American infantry from the 1st Armored Division approached cautiously, weapons ready but voices calm. No shots were fired in anger. The prisoners were searched, given water from GI canteens, and marched to a holding area of tents and wire. Heinrich expected brutality. Instead, medics checked for wounds, and a field kitchen dished out spam sandwiches on soft white bread. It tasted like luxury after months of hardtack and canned sardines. The Americans followed the 1929 Geneva Convention to the letter: humane treatment, no torture, proper food, and eventual work with pay. This international agreement, born from the horrors of the previous World War, ensured that POWs received the same standards as the captor's own troops. Little did Heinrich know how faithfully the US would honor it, even when public opinion raged against it later. After 5 days in the Tunisian enclosure, Heinrich boarded the Liberty ship SS Victory Hope, crammed into holds with 750 other Germans. The voyage lasted 19 days across the Atlantic. Seasickness plagued many, but conditions were bearable: regular meals of oatmeal, stew, and bread, fresh water, even occasional cigarettes. Guards patrolled, but no one was beaten or starved. Rumors of U-boats added tension, yet the ship sailed unmolested. Heinrich spent hours on deck when allowed, watching the vast ocean and wondering about his future. Would he rot in a Siberian-style camp? Be sent to the frozen north? The reality, as the ship docked in Norfolk, Virginia, on June 1st, began to unfold differently. Trains carried the prisoners south through Virginia's rolling hills, the Carolinas pine forests, and into Georgia's flatlands. The landscape transformed into Florida's subtropical expanse: endless swamps, palmetto scrub, and humid air thick with the scent of pine and salt. By June 4th, they reached Camp Blanding, a sprawling 170,000-acre military reservation near Stock, originally built for infantry training but now housing thousands of POWs. Florida's warm climate and booming agriculture made it perfect for labor programs, addressing shortages as American farmers joined the fight overseas. Processing at Blanding was efficient and orderly. Prisoners surrendered valuables, were photographed and fingerprinted, then issued clean uniforms marked boldly with PW in black letters, canvas shoes, blankets, and mess kits. The barracks, wooden with screened windows, tin roofs, and electric lights, felt almost welcoming compared to desert foxholes. 20 men per building, each with a cot and footlocker. Running water in latrines, hot showers daily. That first night, Heinrich sat at a long table and ate fried chicken, cornbread, green beans, and real coffee with sugar. The calories, over 3,000 a day, were the same as US soldiers received. A veteran prisoner, Karl Becker from Hamburg, explained quietly, "They follow the rules here. Geneva Convention. No beatings, no starvation. We work, we get paid 80 cents a day in scrip for the canteen. It's not freedom, but it's life." The next day, June 6, Captain Reynolds, the POW officer, a soft-spoken Midwesterner, addressed the new arrivals through an interpreter. Rules were clear: obey orders, no escapes, respect everyone. In return, mail home, censored, medical care equal to Americans, recreation time, even religious services led by prisoner pastors. Work would be agricultural, filling America's need for labor. Heinrich's group was assigned to citrus groves west of the camp near Gainesville. Foreman Ray Coleman, a lifelong Floridian, greeted them plainly: "Pick carefully, don't bruise the fruit. Fill 28 crates a day, about 90 pounds each, then you're done. Finish early, rest in the shade. Speed helps you, not just us." The work began at dawn. Heinrich climbed ladders, reached for ripe oranges, twisted gently, and dropped them into canvas bags. The sun was intense, humidity relentless, but unlike combat, there was no fear of death. Guards, mostly older men or those classified unfit for frontline duty, watched casually, rifles slung, often chatting or sharing water. By mid-morning, Heinrich's hands blistered, shirt soaked, but he found a rhythm. He filled his first crate in under an hour, the second soon after. Lunch at noon, thick ham sandwiches, fresh fruit, unlimited oranges straight from the trees. Under a massive live oak, Heinrich sat with others, eating slowly. A guard, Corporal Hayes from Alabama, offered a lucky strike. They smoked in companionable silence, Hayes asking in broken German about Heinrich's hometown. Small talk between enemies, about families, pre-war jobs, the hope the war would end soon. By 3 p.m., Heinrich met his quota, stacking the last crate neatly. He joined early finishers in the shade, watching clouds drift. The truck back to camp arrived at 4:30. That evening, over steak and potatoes, Becker shared more. Top workers earned privileges, like supervised outings to nearby lakes for swimming. Heinrich laughed, thinking it a joke. It wasn't. On June 26, after proving reliable, Heinrich volunteered for the first trip. At 2 p.m., 14 prisoners boarded a truck with 3 guards. The drive wound through sandy roads to Kingsley Lake, a vast, circular body of clear water bordered by pines, its white sand bottom visible even deep out. Guards explained, 2 hours, stay visible, no trouble. Then they stepped aside. Prisoners stripped to underwear or kept shorts, waded in. The water was warm, buoyant, alive with the sensation of weightlessness Heinrich hadn't felt since boyhood swims in the Ruhr. He dove under, surfaced laughing, actual laughter from German soldiers. Guards watched from shore, smoking, occasionally calling out boundaries. One guard waded in knee-deep, then dove, swimming nearby. No tension, no threats. Just men sharing water on a summer afternoon. Heinrich floated, staring at the endless blue sky, thinking of the desert battles, the surrender, the ship, this impossible place. Enemies playing together in a lake while millions died elsewhere. It defied logic, yet it was real. As the sun dipped, guards called time. Prisoners dressed, climbed aboard silently, minds reeling. Back at camp, Heinrich lay on his cot, replaying the day. This wasn't weakness from the Americans. It was strength, a quiet insistence that even captives deserved moments of humanity. And in that moment, the war's hatred felt smaller, less inevitable. But Heinrich's story was far from over. Ahead lay deeper work, shifting alliances in the camp, news from Europe that shook beliefs, and more unexpected glimpses of decency that would stay with him forever. The Florida sun had only begun to reveal its secrets. The swimming trips to Kingsley Lake became the talk of the barracks almost immediately after Heinrich's first visit. Word spread quickly among the 7,500 Germans housed at Camp Blanding's main compound and its branch camps across Florida. Men who had once fought in the sands of North Africa or the frozen steppes, now whispering about warm water, laughter, and guards who joined in rather than barked orders. It wasn't every week, but when work quotas were met and the weather cooperated, Captain Reynolds would post a sign-up sheet in the recreation hall. Only the most reliable prisoners, those with clean records, no escape attempts, and consistent productivity, could volunteer. Heinrich qualified early and often. By July 1943, he had joined 3 more outings, each following the same careful pattern: a short truck ride through sandy pine trails, arrival at the lake's white-sand shore, strict boundaries marked by buoys, and 2 precious hours of freedom in the water. Kingsley Lake itself was a marvel, a nearly perfect circle of deep, clear spring-fed water, its sandy bottom so bright it glowed turquoise even from afar. Surrounded by tall pines and palmettos, it felt worlds away from the barbed wire and guard towers back at camp. The prisoners would strip down to shorts or underwear, wade in slowly at first, testing the warmth that contrasted so sharply with the cold Atlantic swims some remembered from training back home. Then came the dives, the races to the floating markers, the playful splashing that echoed across the lake. Heinrich learned to float effortlessly, arms outstretched, letting the buoyancy carry away the tension of captivity. Some men taught others strokes they had learned as boys in rivers or the Baltic Sea. Others simply lay back, staring at the vast Florida sky, listening to the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional call of a guard reminding someone not to stray too far. The guards, mostly sergeants and corporals too old for overseas combat or recovering from minor injuries, kept their rifles on the shore, leaning against trees or propped against the truck. They smoked, talked among themselves, and sometimes waded in to cool off, their uniforms rolled up to the knees. Corporal Hayes, the Alabaman who had shared cigarettes in the groves, once dove in fully clothed after a bet with another guard, emerging laughing and dripping as the prisoners cheered. No one tried to run. Escape was futile in the middle of rural Florida, hundreds of miles from any border, wearing uniforms stamped PW that would mark them instantly. Instead, these hours became a fragile truce, a shared recognition that, for a moment, the war's machinery could pause. Back at camp, life settled into a steady rhythm through the sweltering summer. The citrus harvest peaked in July and August, with groves stretching for miles under the relentless sun. Heinrich's quotas rose slightly to 32 crates per day as he grew more efficient. Reach, twist, pull, place, repeat, his hands calloused but strong, his body filling out from consistent meals. He saved his 80 cents daily in scrip, building a small account at the canteen. There, he bought cigarettes, Lucky Strikes became a favorite, chocolate bars, writing paper, and once, a bottle of low-alcohol beer allowed under camp rules. The canteen also stocked Coca-Cola, which many prisoners adored for its fizz and sweetness. Heinrich tried it, decided it was too syrupy, and stuck to water or the occasional orange juice from the groves. Recreation filled the evenings and weekends. The camp had a soccer field inside the wire, where teams from different barracks competed fiercely, matches so intense that guards sometimes watched from the sidelines, clapping at good plays. Volleyball courts, a library stocked with German classics and American books, translated or in original, and woodworking shops kept minds occupied. Some prisoners built model ships from scrap wood, intricate vessels that reminded them of the U-boats or liners they had seen before the war. English classes drew crowds, officers taught basics, and a few ambitious men aimed to master the language for a future they hoped would include peace. Film screenings happened twice a week in the large recreation hall, Hollywood westerns with John Wayne, musicals, even anti-Nazi documentaries that left some men silent and thoughtful. Heinrich participated quietly. He played chess with Karl Becker, the Hamburg veteran who had become a mentor, discussing everything from pre-war life to the latest rumors filtering through newspapers aloud in the hall. The news from Europe grew grim: Allied landings in Sicily in July, the fall of Mussolini, massive bombing raids on German cities. Letters from home arrived sporadically, censored heavily, but enough slipped through to paint pictures of shortages, air raids, and worry. Heinrich's mother wrote of rationing and blackouts in Essen. His younger sister mentioned school closings. He replied carefully, describing the work, the food, the lake trips, details he knew would be redacted if too revealing, but hoping to offer reassurance that he was alive, healthy, and treated fairly. By September, the citrus season wound down. Foreman Ray Coleman gathered the workers for a final briefing, thanking them for the clean harvest, no bruised fruit, no waste. Many prisoners had come to enjoy the routine, the physical satisfaction of a job well done, the shade breaks under live oaks, the shared lunches where guards and prisoners ate side by side. Some locals even waved from passing trucks, curious rather than hostile. The sight of PW-marked men in the fields had become commonplace across Florida's rural areas, where over 10,000 Axis prisoners, mostly Germans, helped fill labor gaps in groves, canneries, and mills. Reassignment came quickly. Heinrich's group moved to a branch camp near Winter Haven, helping construct a new frozen concentrated orange juice plant, a cutting-edge facility the military wanted for overseas troop supplies. The work shifted to construction, mixing concrete, laying bricks, installing pipes under civilian contractors who demonstrated patiently and corrected gently. It was harder than picking fruit, lifting heavy loads, digging trenches, but still safe, paid the same, and supervised without hostility. Heinrich learned new skills, his body adapting once more. He gained another 10 pounds by year's end, reaching 165 pounds, his face rounded, posture straighter. The malnutrition from North Africa faded into memory. Camp life evolved too. As autumn cooled the air, Florida's cool meant 70s instead of 90s, the lake trips tapered off, too chilly for most, the guard said. Instead, indoor activities ramped up, chess tournaments, soccer on drier fields, holiday preparations for Thanksgiving and Christmas. The camp kitchen prepared special meals, turkey, stuffing, pumpkin pie, following U.S. Army traditions. Prisoners decorated the mess hall with handmade ornaments, some carving wooden figures or folding paper chains. A few even received packages from American families through church groups, small gifts like socks or candy, gestures that bewildered and touched them. Yet beneath the routine, tension simmered in subtle ways. Some hardline Nazis among the early arrivals clashed with later captives who seemed less fanatical. Guards intervened rarely, letting the prisoner's own hierarchy maintain order. Heinrich stayed neutral, focusing on survival and the small mercies around him, the way a guard might slip an extra orange during a break, or how Captain Reynolds personally checked on a sick prisoner. These acts accumulated, chipping away at the propaganda Heinrich had once believed, that Americans were soft, cruel, without honor. As 1943 turned to 1944, the war's distant thunder grew louder. Italy's surrender, advances on multiple fronts, the relentless bombing of the homeland. Heinrich studied maps in the recreation hall, tracing lines that showed Germany's shrinking territory. He confided in Becker one night, "We can't win this anymore." Becker nodded grimly. "We never could, not really. But we can survive it." The swimming trips had been more than recreation, they were proof of something deeper, a policy of humanity that refused to mirror the enemy's cruelty. In the quiet moments floating in Kingsley Lake, Heinrich had glimpsed a possibility, that even between nations at war, basic decency could endure. And as the months stretched on, that glimpse would grow into something stronger, a quiet conviction that life, even in captivity, held room for hope. But greater changes loomed. News of atrocities in Europe would arrive, rations would shift, and the war's end would bring new reckonings. Heinrich's American chapter was only halfway written, with more unexpected turns ahead in the Florida sun. As 1944 dawned, the Florida heat returned with a vengeance, but Heinrich Schultz and his fellow prisoners had long since adapted to the rhythm of captivity. The construction project at the frozen concentrate orange juice plant near Winter Haven progressed steadily, concrete foundations poured, steel beams erected, pipes laid under the watchful eyes of civilian engineers who treated the POWs more like hired hands than enemies. Heinrich had mastered the basics of masonry, his once blistered hands now steady and sure. The work was demanding, but the days ended with the same satisfaction. Quotas met, scrip added to the canteen account, and the knowledge that this labor helped feed Allied troops overseas with something new and innovative, frozen orange juice in cans that could survive months at sea. The plant itself was a symbol of America's wartime ingenuity, born from the urgent need to deliver vitamin C to soldiers fighting in the Pacific and Europe. Prisoners like Heinrich contributed directly, mixing mortar, hauling materials, and even helping install refrigeration units. Foreman Coleman, the same citrus veteran from the Groves, now oversaw the site. He praised efficiency, occasionally slipping an extra break to the fastest workers. "You're building something that'll last," he'd say through the interpreter. Heinrich understood the irony, Germans constructing a facility to nourish the forces arrayed against their homeland. Yet there was no malice in the labor, only the quiet grind of routine that kept minds occupied and bodies healthy. Camp dynamics shifted subtly that spring. With more North African veterans arriving and some from the Italian campaign, the compound swelled to nearly 8,000 at Blanding and its branches. Tensions occasionally flared between staunch Nazis, often younger men or those from SS units, and the pragmatists who had seen enough of war. In one barracks, a heated argument over loyalty led to a brief scuffle. Guards separated the men without force, letting the prisoners' own leaders restore order. Heinrich steered clear, preferring the company of Karl Becker and a few others who focused on survival rather than ideology. They played endless games of chess, read from the camp library's growing collection, including American novels translated into German, and attended English classes where they practiced phrases that might prove useful one day. Recreation remained a lifeline. Soccer leagues grew more organized, with teams named after German cities or Afrika Korps divisions competing on the dusty field. Heinrich joined a side from Essen, scoring a few goals in friendly matches watched by guards who sometimes bet cigarettes on the outcome. The woodworking shop produced beautiful model ships and planes, some intricate enough to earn praise from visitors. Film nights featured classics like Casablanca and The Great Dictator, the latter leaving the hall in stunned silence. Anti-Nazi documentaries appeared occasionally, their footage stark and undeniable. Some prisoners walked out, others sat frozen, grappling with what they saw. Letters from home grew scarcer and more desperate. Heinrich's mother described bombings that leveled parts of Essen, food shortages, and the constant wail of air raid sirens. His replies stayed measured. Work was steady, health good, treatment fair. He wrote about the oranges, the lake swims from the previous summer, details he hoped would offer a glimmer of normalcy amid the chaos. Becker's family in Hamburg had survived a raid but lost their apartment. He shared the news quietly, his usual humor subdued. Then came D-Day, June 6, 1944. The news crackled over the camp radio in the recreation hall, Allied forces landing in Normandy. Guards allowed prisoners to listen, no gloating, just the facts. Whispers spread, the end might come sooner. Heinrich felt a complex mix, relief that the war might end, dread for what awaited Germany. The Eastern Front's horrors loomed larger, friends who had fought there spoke of unimaginable losses. Survival in Florida suddenly seemed like the best possible fate. Rations stayed generous through summer, beef, chicken, fresh vegetables, fruit, keeping weight on and spirits up. Heinrich reached 168 pounds, his pre-capture frame restored. Occasional privileges continued, supervised walks beyond the wire for model prisoners, visits to local stores under guard, where curious Floridians stared but rarely spoke harshly. Some guards shared family photos, stories of home. Corporal Hayes talked about his Alabama farm, dreaming of returning after the war. By fall, the juice plant neared completion. Heinrich's group shifted to maintenance, painting, minor repairs, then to logging in northern Florida's pine forests. The change brought new challenges: axes, saws, hauling timber for crates and paper mills. The air smelled of resin, the work harder but varied. Teams felled trees, loaded trucks, earning the same pay. Locals sometimes waved, offered water. The sight of PW-marked men in the woods had become ordinary. As 1944 ended, Christmas arrived with special touches. The kitchen prepared turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, pie. Prisoners decorated barracks with paper chains and handmade ornaments. A choir sang carols in German and English. Guards joined a joint service, the chaplain reading from the Bible about peace. For a few hours, the wire felt less confining. Heinrich thought of his family, hoped they had enough to eat. He wrote home that night, "We had a good meal today. Thinking of you." But the new year brought darker clouds. In early 1945, photographs and reports of Nazi concentration camps reached American newspapers. Outrage swept the country. Congress demanded action. At Blanding, Colonel Reynolds assembled the prisoners. He spoke plainly. Rations would reduce slightly, less meat, more bread and potatoes, to align with public sentiment while still meeting Geneva minimums. No torture, no abuse, but the easy abundance would ease. Some prisoners protested quietly, most accepted. Heinrich felt the weight. Rumors of camps in Poland had circulated in the Wehrmacht, dismissed as propaganda. Now, images didn't lie, emaciated figures, mass graves. He sat in the barracks afterward, staring at the wall. Complicity wasn't just wearing the uniform, it was silence, obedience to a regime capable of such evil. The atmosphere cooled. Guards became more formal, distances greater. Recreation continued, soccer, films, but the casual camaraderie faded. Heinrich focused inward, working harder, saving scrip, preparing for whatever came next. The war's end felt close, inevitable. Germany surrendered May 8, 1945. Cheers erupted from the American side, prisoners stood silent. Relief mixed with grief, for lost comrades, ruined cities, uncertain futures. Rations adjusted further briefly, then stabilized. Work persisted, logging, farm tasks, while repatriation plans formed slowly. Heinrich watched the calendar, counting months. Florida had been a strange refuge, oranges, lakes, unexpected kindness amid global catastrophe. It had kept him alive, healthy, human. Yet the reckoning lingered. As summer 1945 approached, Heinrich knew the final chapters awaited: departure, return to a shattered homeland, and carrying the memories of a war where enemies could, for brief moments, share a swim in warm water and remember their shared humanity. The story wasn't over. Repatriation would test them all, but the lessons of Camp Blanding, dignity, decency, survival, would endure long after the gates opened. The summer of 1945 arrived with a strange stillness at Camp Blanding. Germany had surrendered on May 8. The war in Europe was over. For the American Guards, it meant celebrations, extra leave, letters home promising an earlier return to civilian life. For the German prisoners, it brought a complicated mixture of relief, anxiety, and quiet grief. Rations had already been reduced slightly after the concentration camp photographs reached the American public. Now the cuts became more noticeable: less meat, sometimes only twice a week instead of daily, smaller portions of butter and sugar, more potatoes, bread, and beans. The meals were still nutritious and well above the minimum Geneva Convention requirements, but the contrast with the abundant food of 1943 to 1944 was stark. Many prisoners lost the extra weight they had gained. Heinrich dropped back to around 158 pounds by late summer, still healthier than he had been in Tunisia, but a visible reminder that the special treatment was ending. The atmosphere inside the camp changed more than the food did. The casual friendliness that had characterized the early years largely disappeared. Guards spoke less with prisoners, kept more distance during work details, and carried their rifles with a little more formality. The small gestures, extra cigarettes, shared stories about families, occasional jokes, became rare. Most Americans now knew about Dachau, Buchenwald, Auschwitz. Even if they did not blame the ordinary Wehrmacht soldier directly, the mood had shifted. The war was no longer just about territory and ideology, it was about moral horror. Heinrich felt the change keenly. He had never seen a concentration camp, never guarded one, never even been stationed in occupied Poland or the Soviet Union. Yet the photographs he had glimpsed in the camp newspaper haunted him. Thin faces behind wire, piles of shoes, mass graves. He remembered rumors he had heard in North Africa, whispers about special actions in the East, about trains going somewhere no one returned from. He had dismissed them as enemy propaganda. Now he could no longer do so. Sitting on his cot one evening, he asked Karl Becker quietly, "Do you think we really didn't know?" Becker looked at him for a long time before answering. Some knew. Some suspected. Most of us chose not to ask questions. That's different from not knowing. They never spoke of it again. Work continued. The frozen concentrate plant was finished and operating. Heinrich's group was sent back to agricultural labor, picking vegetables, harvesting peanuts, clearing land for new groves. The work was familiar and steady, a kind of anchor. He still met his quotas early when possible, still sat under live oaks during breaks, still watched the American Guards from a distance. Some of the older guards who had been there since 1943 occasionally nodded at him in recognition, but the easy conversations were gone. Repatriation planning began slowly. The United States had over 370,000 German POWs scattered across more than 500 camps. Shipping them back to Europe required coordination with the British and French authorities, who were already overwhelmed with millions of displaced persons, refugees, and their own returning soldiers. Priority was given first to sick prisoners, then to those captured earliest. Heinrich's group, captured in May 1943, was relatively high on the list, but the process moved at a bureaucratic pace. In late August 1945, the first large transport left Camp Blanding. About 800 men were loaded onto buses, taken to Jacksonville, and put on a Liberty ship bound for France. The departing prisoners were quiet. There were no celebrations, only handshakes and a few promises to write once they were home. Heinrich stood at the fence with several hundred others and watched the buses disappear down the dusty road. He felt something tighten in his chest, part envy, part fear. He was not yet ready to face what waited in Germany. The following months dragged. Recreation activities continued, soccer, chess tournaments, film screenings, but the spirit was subdued. Many prisoners grew restless. Some who had once accepted captivity quietly now spoke openly about wanting to go home, about families they had not seen in years, about cities that might no longer exist. Others, especially younger men who had joined late in the war, began to express bitterness about the long wait. Fights became more frequent, though still minor. The camp administration responded by tightening schedules and increasing guard presence. Heinrich kept to himself more. He wrote longer letters home, knowing many would never arrive. He described the work, the weather, the food, careful never to criticize the Americans or mention anything that could be seen as intelligence. He asked about his mother's health, his sister's schooling, whether they still had the old apartment in Essen. The replies that came back were shorter each time. His mother wrote of cold winters, little coal, and constant worry about his return. His sister mentioned friends who had lost fathers and brothers. The tone was always the same: come home soon. Christmas 1945 was quieter than the previous year. The kitchen still served turkey, but portions were smaller. Decorations were modest. A few prisoners sang carols in the barracks late at night, but the singing felt more like mourning than celebration. Heinrich lay awake thinking about the lake swims of 1943, how impossible they seemed now, how distant. He wondered whether Corporal Hayes was still at the camp, whether the man had gone home to Alabama yet, whether he ever thought about the Germans he had once guarded. In January 1946, Heinrich's name finally appeared on a repatriation list. He would depart in mid-March. The news brought a strange combination of relief and dread. He had survived the war. He had been treated far better than he had ever expected. Yet he knew almost nothing about the Germany he was returning to, how much had been destroyed, how people were living, whether his mother and sister were still safe. The last weeks passed in a blur of medical examinations, paperwork, and final work details. On March 11, 1946, Heinrich and 340 other men from Camp Blanding were loaded onto buses at dawn. The ride to Jacksonville was silent. At the port, they boarded the Liberty ship SS Marine Perch. The vessel carried nearly 2,000 German prisoners, many weak from long internment, some missing limbs. Heinrich stood on deck as the ship pulled away from the American coast, watching the low shoreline of Florida disappear. He felt no hatred for the country that had held him captive, only a quiet, complicated gratitude. The voyage took 16 days. The Atlantic was rough, many were seasick. Food was basic: soup, bread, coffee, but adequate. Heinrich spent most of his time on deck, staring at the horizon, trying to imagine what waited on the other side. The ship docked at Le Havre, France, on March 27. French authorities processed the prisoners quickly: delousing, medical checks, basic questioning. Then came the trains, long, slow journeys through a war-torn continent. Heinrich reached the American occupation zone in western Germany on April 5. From there, another train took him toward the Ruhr. When he finally stepped onto the platform in Essen on April 9, 1946, the city he remembered was gone. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble. The famous Krupp factories were twisted skeletons of steel. The air smelled of ash and damp stone. His mother and sister met him at the station. His mother had aged 20 years in 3. His sister, now 17, was thin and serious. They embraced without many words. There were no tears, only the exhausted relief of still being alive. Heinrich moved into a single room in a half-destroyed building where his mother and sister were already living. There was no work at first. The economy had collapsed. Currency was almost worthless. People traded cigarettes, coffee, and canned food. Heinrich used the skills he had learned in Florida. He joined reconstruction crews, clearing rubble, mixing mortar, repairing walls. The pay was small, but it was enough to buy bread and potatoes on the black market. He never spoke much about his time in America. When people asked where he had spent the war, he said only, North Africa, and then a camp. Most assumed he meant a camp in Germany or Poland. He did not correct them. Only once, years later, did he show his sister a small photograph he had kept hidden in his wallet, a grainy snapshot taken at Kingsley Lake in the summer of 1943. 12 German prisoners standing on the white sand, wet hair, tired smiles, American guards in the background. His sister looked at it for a long time. "They really let you swim?" she asked. "Yes," Heinrich said. "They really did." He kept that photograph until the day he died in 1984. After his death, his children found it among his papers. They asked their mother what it meant. She told them simply, "Your father was a prisoner in America. They treated him better than we expected. Better than we deserved, maybe." That small photograph, men who had once been enemies, standing together on a Florida lakeshore, smiling, became the quiet proof of something Heinrich never quite knew how to explain, that even in the middle of the worst war in history, some people chose to remember that their enemies were still human. And sometimes, for 2 hours on a summer afternoon, that choice was enough. The years after Heinrich Schultz returned to Essen in April 1946 were the hardest of his life, yet they were also the years in which he quietly rebuilt everything the war had taken, piece by piece, day by day, without fanfare. Germany in 1946 was a landscape of ruins. The Ruhr Valley, once the industrial heart of Europe, looked like a city bombed back to the Stone Age. Factories that had built tanks and guns now stood as skeletal frames open to the sky. Streets Heinrich had walked as a boy were unrecognizable. Entire blocks had vanished under mountains of brick and twisted steel. Food was scarce. The black market ruled. A pack of American cigarettes could buy a week's bread. A can of Spam from a care package was worth more than a month's wages in the worthless Reichsmark. Heinrich moved into the single damp room his mother and sister shared in a half-collapsed tenement. No heat, no running water most days, windows patched with cardboard. His mother, now 54 but looking much older, worked mending clothes for neighbors. His sister, barely 17, had left school to help. They survived on ration cards that provided little more than watery soup and ersatz coffee. When Heinrich arrived, thin and quiet, his mother simply held him for a long time. No questions. No tears. Just the exhausted relief of having one more person alive under the same roof. Work came slowly. At first, Heinrich joined the Trümmerfrauen and Trümmerfrauen, rubble women and men, who cleared debris by hand, sorting usable bricks from the waste. The pay was minimal, often in food vouchers or cigarettes. But he had learned something valuable in Florida: how to mix mortar properly, how to lay bricks straight, how to read a blueprint without wasting material. Civilian foreman noticed. Within months he was promoted from laborer to assistant mason on reconstruction crews rebuilding apartment blocks and small factories. By 1948, the Marshall Plan money began to flow. The economy stirred. Heinrich found steady work with a local construction firm. He worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week, carrying heavy loads, climbing scaffolding, learning to operate basic machinery. His hands, already toughened by years of orange picking and logging, grew even stronger. He saved every pfennig he could. In 1949 he married Anna, a quiet woman who had lost her brother on the Eastern Front and her father in an air raid. They had met while clearing rubble. She had handed him a brick, he had thanked her, and somehow that small exchange became the foundation of everything that followed. Their first child, a daughter named Clara, arrived in 1950. A son, Klaus, followed in 1953. By then Heinrich had started his own small contracting business. Nothing grand, just a crew of 5 men repairing bomb-damaged houses, building additions, installing new roofs. The work was honest. People trusted him because he never overcharged, never cut corners, and always finished on time. He told his workers the same thing Foreman Coleman had once told him in the Groves: do it right the first time. It costs less that way. He rarely spoke about the war. When friends or neighbors asked, he gave the same short answer: North Africa, then a camp. Most assumed he meant a camp in Germany or Russia. He let them. Only Anna knew the fuller story. One evening in the early 1950s, after the children were asleep, he took the faded photograph from Kingsley Lake out of his desk drawer and showed it to her. 12 Germans in wet PW uniforms, smiling on a white sand shore. American guards in the background, rifles slung casually, one man laughing. She studied it for a long time. They let you swim. Yes, he said. They really did. She touched the edge of the photo gently. You kept this all these years. It reminded me that people can choose to be decent, even when everything else says they shouldn't. The photograph stayed in the drawer. Heinrich never showed it to anyone else. Not his children, not his grandchildren, not the occasional journalist who came looking for stories about former POWs. He didn't want pity or admiration. He simply wanted to remember that there had been moments, 2 hours here, a lunch break there, when the war had paused long enough for humanity to breathe. Heinrich lived the rest of his life in Essen. He watched the city rise again, new factories, wide streets, modern apartments where rubble once stood. He watched his children grow. Clara became a teacher, Klaus an engineer. He watched the wall go up in 1961, then come down in 1989. He voted in every election, quietly grateful for the democracy he had glimpsed in American newspapers and films during captivity. He died in the spring of 1984, at the age of 64, from a heart condition that had developed slowly over the decades. At the funeral, the church was full. Neighbors, former workers, old friends. His children spoke briefly. They mentioned his quiet strength, his fairness, the way he always had time for anyone who needed help. They did not mention Florida. They did not know about the lake, the oranges, the guards who had shared cigarettes and laughter. After the service, Clara and Klaus went through their father's desk. In the bottom drawer, beneath old letters and tax papers, they found the photograph. 12 men on a sunny shore, smiling like tourists. American soldiers standing nearby, relaxed, almost friendly. On the back, in Heinrich's careful handwriting, a single line. Kingsley Lake, June 1943. They let us be human. Clara and Klaus sat with their mother and looked at the image for a long time. Anna told them the story then, the surrender in Tunisia, the ship, the camp in Florida, the groves, the lake swims, the way the Americans had followed the rules when so many others did not. She spoke without anger or exaggeration, only the simple truth of what had happened. The photograph now rests in a small display case in the Ruhr Museum in Essen, part of an exhibit on the experiences of German prisoners of war. Most visitors walk past it without stopping. It looks ordinary, a group of young men enjoying a summer day by the water. But those who pause and read the caption understand something deeper. It is not a photograph of victory or defeat. It is a photograph of mercy. Of rules honored when no one was watching. Of enemies who, for 2 hours on a warm afternoon in 1943, were allowed to remember they were still people. Heinrich Schultz never returned to America. He never tried to find Corporal Hayes or Captain Reynolds or any of the guards who had once supervised him. But in the quiet moments of his life, when he watched his children play, when he laid bricks under a clear sky, when he held his wife's hand, he carried the memory of that lake. A reminder that even in the darkest times, decency can survive if someone chooses to preserve it. And sometimes, that choice is the only victory that matters. If this story touched you, give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to remember that humanity can endure even the worst of wars. Subscribe if you want more forgotten chapters like this, real people, real moments, real hope in impossible places. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Have you heard stories like this from your family? Let us know you're here, keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching. And thank you for helping make sure stories like Heinrich Schultz's are never forgotten.